A stolen dossier threatens to shatter the British government, and only Hercule Poirot can unravel the truth. Welcome to the Prime Minister's Secret, Poirot and the Political Cover-Up, a gripping tale of deception and deduction. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and dive into the mystery. If you're loving this story, hit subscribe. Your support means everything to us. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Summons. Hercule Poirot sat in his tidy London flat, savouring the stillness of a foggy 1930s evening. His perfectly waxed moustache gleamed under the soft glow of a lamp as he sipped a tisane, his mind idling over the intricacies of human nature. The peace was broken by the shrill ring of the telephone. On the other end was Captain Hastings, his voice trembling with urgency. "Poirot, old friend, you're needed at once. The Prime Minister himself demands your help. It's a crisis of national importance." Poirot's sharp eyes narrowed, his curiosity ignited. Without hesitation, he grabbed his hat and coat, stepping into the damp, misty streets of London. The taxi ride to 10 Downing Street was a blur, his thoughts racing. What could be so dire that the nation's leader called on a private detective? At Downing Street, Poirot was led through heavy oak doors into a dimly lit study. The Prime Minister, a tall man with worry etched into his face, paced before a crackling fire. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming," he said, his voice low. "A confidential memo has vanished, one that could ruin me and destabilize the government. It details wartime funds diverted improperly, millions unaccounted for, allegedly with my knowledge. If this leaks, it's the end of my career, and Britain's trust in its leadership." Poirot leaned forward, his small hands folded neatly. "Tell me, Prime Minister, who knew of this memo? Who had access? Every detail matters." The Prime Minister explained the memo was kept in a locked safe, accessible only to his inner circle, his private secretary, a trusted aide, his wife, and a junior minister. The document outlined secret dealings with foreign allies during the war, funds siphoned for personal gain, now possibly in the hands of a political rival or foreign agent. Poirot's mind buzzed, his little grey cells at work. He began with the basics, as he always did. For example, consider the secretary, a man named Harold Grayson, who handled all correspondence. Could he have been bribed? Or the aide, Miss Clara Wentworth, ambitious and often overlooked, might she harbour resentment? Then there was the Prime Minister's wife, Lady Margaret, whose late-night visits to the study were not unnoticed. And what of the junior minister, Reginald Holt, rumoured to be cosy with the opposition? Poirot scribbled notes, sketching a timeline of the memo's last known moments. Practical tip for unravelling such mysteries: always start with motive and opportunity. Who gains from the memo's theft? Who was in the room when it disappeared? The Prime Minister admitted the safe was last checked 2 days prior, and only Grayson and Wentworth had been in the study since. As Poirot probed further, he noticed a flicker of hesitation in the Prime Minister's eyes when mentioning Grayson. A clue, perhaps? The detective's method was meticulous. Observe, listen, deduce. He asked for a list of everyone who'd entered Downing Street that week, down to the cleaning staff. Every mystery, he mused, is like a puzzle. One must find the corner pieces first. By the end of the meeting, Poirot had a clear picture of the stakes: a missing memo, a web of suspects, and a ticking clock before the scandal broke. The Prime Minister looked drained but hopeful. "You'll find the truth, won't you, Poirot?" The detective smiled faintly. "The truth, mon ami, is like a shadow. It cannot hide forever." With that, Poirot left the study, ready to interrogate his first suspect. The stage is set, the mystery deepens. Join us next time as Poirot begins his hunt for answers in the corridors of power. Chapter 2. The secretary's shadow, Hercule Poirot, stepped out of the Prime Minister's study, his polished shoes clicking softly on the polished floors of 10 Downing Street. The fog outside had thickened, cloaking London in a veil of secrecy that matched the mystery at hand. He had a name to start with: Harold Grayson, the Prime Minister's private secretary, whose fleeting hesitation in the conversation had caught Poirot's sharp attention. Grayson was waiting in a small office down the hall, a wiry man with thinning hair and nervous hands that fidgeted with a fountain pen. Poirot entered, his calm demeanour masking the intensity of his scrutiny. "Monsieur Grayson," he began, seating himself with deliberate grace. "You are the gatekeeper of the Prime Minister's secrets." "No." "Tell me about this memo. When did you last see it?" Grayson's eyes darted to the side, a telltale sign of discomfort. He claimed he'd last handled the memo 3 days ago, placing it in the safe after a late-night meeting. But his story wavered. First, he said he locked the safe immediately, then admitted he'd left the room briefly to fetch a file. Poirot's moustache twitched. "And who else was in the study during this time, monsieur?" Grayson stammered, naming only Miss Wentworth, the aide, who had been organising papers. But Poirot sensed a gap in the tale. He pressed further, asking about Grayson's routine, his loyalties, his recent visitors. Grayson admitted to a meeting with a journalist the previous week, a man known for digging into political scandals. Nothing came of it, he insisted, but his sweating brow suggested otherwise. Poirot's questions grew sharper, like a fencer's blade. Had Grayson noticed anyone lingering near the safe? Had he ever shared the combination? Grayson denied everything, but his voice cracked when Poirot mentioned the opposition leader, Sir Edmund Blake, a known rival of the Prime Minister. Could Grayson have been tempted by a bribe or a promise of power? The detective made a mental note to investigate Blake's movements. As the interrogation wound down, Poirot rose, his eyes never leaving Grayson's face. "You have been most helpful, monsieur, though perhaps not in the way you intended." He left the office, his mind cataloguing every pause, every glance. Outside, he overheard a hushed conversation between 2 staff members about Grayson's late-night habits. Often seen leaving the building long after hours, a lead worth pursuing. The clock was ticking, and Poirot knew the next step was to confront Miss Clara Wentworth, whose name kept surfacing. Was she an innocent bystander or a player in this dangerous game? The fog seemed to whisper secrets as Poirot prepared for his next move, the weight of the nation's stability resting on his shoulders. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the aide's story unravels under Poirot's relentless gaze. Chapter 3. The aide's ambition. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hallway of 10 Downing Street, the echo of his footsteps fading into the heavy silence of the early morning. The fog outside clung to the windows, casting ghostly shadows that seemed to mirror the elusive truth he sought. His interrogation of Harold Grayson had left him with more questions than answers, but one name lingered in his mind. Clara Wentworth, the Prime Minister's aide. She was young, sharp, and ambitious, a woman whose quiet efficiency masked a hunger for recognition. Poirot had learned from a passing staff member that Clara often stayed late, poring over documents in the study, her presence unremarkable yet constant. Was she merely diligent, or was there something more sinister behind her dedication? With his notebook tucked into his coat, Poirot made his way to the small anteroom where Clara awaited, determined to uncover her role in this tangled affair. The anteroom was sparsely furnished, its walls lined with faded portraits of past leaders, their stern gazes a reminder of the stakes at hand. Clara Wentworth sat at a wooden desk, her auburn hair neatly pinned, her hands folded with a composure that bordered on defiance. She rose as Poirot entered, offering a polite but guarded smile. "Monsieur Poirot, I've heard of your reputation. How may I assist you?" Her voice was steady, but Poirot's keen eyes caught the slight tightening of her jaw. He settled into a chair, his movements deliberate, and began with a disarming tone. "Mademoiselle Wentworth, you are a vital thread in the fabric of this office, no? Tell me of your duties, especially concerning the safe where this most unfortunate memo was kept." Clara explained her role, organising the Prime Minister's schedule, handling correspondence, and occasionally accessing the safe for routine documents. She claimed she hadn't touched the memo in question, insisting her work was administrative, not confidential. But Poirot noticed her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. A nervous habit, perhaps? He shifted tactics, asking about her movements 3 nights ago, when Grayson had briefly left the study. Clara's eyes flickered, and she said she'd been sorting files in the corner, unaware of the safe's status. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. "And yet, mademoiselle, you are observant. Did you see anyone approach the safe? Anyone unusual in the building that night?" Clara hesitated, then mentioned a maintenance worker she didn't recognize, lingering near the study door. A vague detail, but Poirot jotted it down, sensing she was holding back. To test her, Poirot circled the conversation to her ambitions. "You are young, talented, yet in a role that offers little spotlight. Does this not frustrate you?" Clara's smile tightened. "I serve the Prime Minister loyally," she replied, but her tone carried a hint of bitterness. Poirot probed deeper, mentioning rumours of her meetings with opposition figures, including a dinner with Sir Edmund Blake's associate last month. Clara's composure faltered, her cheeks flushing. It was a professional courtesy, nothing more, she insisted. But Poirot's little grey cells were buzzing. Could Clara, overlooked and underappreciated, have seen the memo as a ticket to greater influence? Had she passed it to Blake's camp, or was she merely a pawn in a larger scheme? As the interview drew to a close, Poirot asked one final question. "Mademoiselle, if you were to suspect someone in this office, who would it be?" Clara paused, her gaze drifting to the window. "I'd rather not speculate," she said, but her silence spoke volumes. Poirot thanked her, his mind already mapping the connections between Clara, Grayson, and the mysterious maintenance worker. As he left the anteroom, he overheard a typist whispering about Clara's recent argument with the Prime Minister's wife, Lady Margaret, over access to the study. Another thread to tug. Poirot's steps quickened as he headed toward his next encounter, the weight of the missing memo growing heavier. The truth was close, yet still shrouded in the fog of deceit. Join us next time as Poirot turns his attention to Lady Margaret, whose secrets may hold the key to the scandal. Chapter 4. The Lady's Leverage. Hercule Poirot emerged from the anteroom, his mind a whirl of suspicion and possibility. The faint scent of Clara Wentworth's lavender perfume lingering in the air. The corridors of 10 Downing Street were quiet now, the early morning giving way to a muted bustle as staff began their day. The fog outside had not lifted, its tendrils curling against the tall windows, a fitting backdrop for the deepening mystery. Clara's guarded responses and the whispered rumour of her clash with Lady Margaret, the Prime Minister's wife, had piqued Poirot's interest. Lady Margaret was no mere bystander in this political drama. Her late-night visits to the study and her influence over her husband made her a figure of intrigue. Was she a protector of her husband's legacy, or a player with her own agenda? Poirot adjusted his gloves, his resolve firm, and made his way to the private drawing room where Lady Margaret awaited, ready to unravel another layer of the scandal threatening to engulf the government. The drawing room was a study in elegance, its walls adorned with gilt-framed landscapes and a crystal chandelier casting soft light over a velvet settee. Lady Margaret stood by a tall window, her silhouette regal against the grey morning. She was a striking woman in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair swept into an elegant chignon and eyes that held both warmth and steel. As Poirot entered, she turned, offering a measured smile. "Monsieur Poirot, what a pleasure, though I wish it were under happier circumstances," she said, her voice smooth, but tinged with weariness. Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Madam, it is the circumstances that bring me here, for they are most grave. May we discuss the missing memo and your role in this household?" Lady Margaret gestured for him to sit, settling herself with the grace of someone accustomed to scrutiny. She began by describing her duties as the Prime Minister's wife, hosting dignitaries, managing social events, and occasionally advising her husband on delicate matters. The memo, she claimed, was beyond her purview. She rarely entered the study, and when she did, It was to bring her husband tea or discuss family matters. But Poirot's instincts told him there was more. He leaned forward, his tone gentle yet probing. "Madame, it has come to my attention that you were seen in the study late at night, near the time the memo vanished. Might you clarify what brought you there?" Lady Margaret's fingers tightened around her pearl necklace, a fleeting sign of unease. "I was merely checking on my husband," she said. "He works such long hours, and I worry for his health." Poirot's moustache twitched as he noted her guarded tone. He shifted his approach, asking about her relationships with the staff, particularly Clara Wentworth. Lady Margaret's expression cooled. "Miss Wentworth is efficient but oversteps her bounds," she said sharply. "She's too curious about matters that don't concern her." Poirot seized on this, recalling the typist's whisper of an argument. And this disagreement with Miss Wentworth, what was its nature? Lady Margaret hesitated, then admitted to a heated exchange over Clara's insistence on accessing certain files without permission. It was a trifling matter, she insisted, but Poirot sensed a deeper rift. Could Lady Margaret, protective of her husband's reputation, have discovered the memo's contents and taken it to shield him? Or was she deflecting blame onto Clara? To test her, Poirot mentioned the opposition leader, Sir Edmund Blake, whose name had surfaced in earlier conversations. "Have you had dealings with Sir Edmund, madame? Perhaps a social encounter that might shed light?" Lady Margaret's eyes flashed with indignation. "That man is a vulture, circling for any scrap of weakness," she said. "I would never entertain him." Yet Poirot caught a flicker of fear in her gaze, as if Blake's influence loomed larger than she admitted. He pressed further, asking about the maintenance worker Clara had mentioned, the one seen near the study. Lady Margaret claimed ignorance, but her quick glance toward the door betrayed her. Poirot made a mental note to investigate the household staff records, sensing a connection yet to be uncovered. As the interview drew to a close, Poirot stood, his demeanour polite but unyielding. "Madame, the truth is like a delicate flower. It requires careful tending to bloom. I thank you for your candour." Lady Margaret nodded, her composure intact, but her eyes wary. As Poirot left the drawing room, he overheard a footman mention Lady Margaret's recent visit to a private club frequented by political insiders, including Blake's allies. A new thread emerged, weaving itself into the tapestry of suspects. The memo's disappearance was no simple theft. It was a chess game, and Lady Margaret was a queen with moves yet to be revealed. Poirot's next step was clear. Track down the mysterious maintenance worker and uncover his role in this intricate plot. The fog of deceit was thick, but Poirot's little grey cells were sharper still. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the trail leads to the shadows of Downing Street's unseen workers. Chapter 5. The Shadow in the Servants' Quarters. Hercule Poirot descended the grand staircase of 10 Downing Street, his polished shoes tapping rhythmically against the marble, each step echoing his resolve to untangle the web of deceit surrounding the missing memo. The morning fog had begun to lift, but the air inside the government's nerve centre remained heavy with secrets. Lady Margaret's guarded responses and the hint of her visit to a political insiders club had sharpened Poirot's focus, but a new lead beckoned. The mysterious maintenance worker Clara Wentworth had mentioned, seen lurking near the study on the night the memo vanished. Who was this figure, unnoticed by most yet potentially pivotal? Poirot's little grey cells hummed with anticipation as he navigated the labyrinthine corridors toward the servants' quarters, where the unseen hands of Downing Street toiled. His destination was the housekeeper's office, where records of staff comings and goings might reveal the identity of this elusive worker. The servants' quarters were a stark contrast to the opulent rooms above. Narrow hallways, lit by flickering bulbs, smelled faintly of polish and coal dust. Poirot found Mrs. Agnes Fielding, the housekeeper, in a cramped office cluttered with ledgers and schedules. She was a stout woman in her 50s, her grey hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes sharp with the authority of one who kept the household running. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, rising with a mix of curiosity and caution. "I don't often see gentlemen like you down here. What brings you to my domain? Poirot offered a charming smile, his voice smooth as velvet. Madam Fielding, you are the guardian of this house's pulse. I seek information about a maintenance worker, one seen near the Prime Minister's study 3 nights ago. A man, perhaps, who did not belong? Mrs. Fielding's brow furrowed as she opened a thick ledger, her fingers tracing columns of names and dates. She confirmed that no maintenance was scheduled that night, but a temporary worker, a man named Thomas Kerr, had been called in for an urgent plumbing repair in the West Wing. Kerr was new, hired through an agency, and had worked only a handful of shifts. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And this Monsieur Kerr, where might I find him? Mrs. Fielding shook her head. Kerr hadn't reported for work since that night, and his agency file listed an address in East London. Poirot's suspicions deepened. A worker who appeared only once, near the time of the theft, and then vanished. It was no coincidence. Determined to pursue this lead, Poirot questioned Mrs. Fielding further about Kerr's behaviour. She recalled him as quiet, almost too quiet, keeping his cap low and avoiding conversation. He'd carried a toolbox, she said, but seemed more interested in the study's hallway than the pipes he was meant to fix. Poirot's mind raced. Could Kerr have been a plant, sent by an outside force, perhaps Sir Edmund Blake or a foreign agent, to steal the memo? Or was he a scapegoat conveniently placed to take the fall? Poirot asked to see Kerr's employment records, noting the agency's name and a reference from a minor official in the Home Office. Another thread to tug, he thought, sensing a connection to the political machinations above. As he probed deeper, Poirot inquired about the study's layout. Mrs. Fielding described a service door near the safe, rarely used but accessible to staff. Had Kerr known of it? She couldn't say. But she mentioned a curious detail. The service door's lock had been oiled recently, though no maintenance was logged. Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. Small details often crack the grandest mysteries. He thanked Mrs. Fielding, his mind already plotting his next move, a visit to Kerr's listed address. But before leaving, he asked one final question. Madame, have you noticed any unusual visitors to the servants' quarters? Anyone, perhaps, meeting with Mademoiselle Wentworth or Lady Margaret? Mrs. Fielding hesitated, then admitted she'd seen Clara speaking to a man in a dark coat near the back entrance a week ago, their voices low and urgent. She hadn't caught his face, but his manner suggested secrecy. Poirot left the housekeeper's office, his notebook filled with new clues. Thomas Kerr, the vanishing worker, a freshly oiled lock, and Clara's clandestine meeting. The puzzle was taking shape, but the pieces were scattered across London's underbelly and its halls of power. As he stepped into the courtyard, the last wisps of fog swirled around him, a reminder that the truth remained just out of reach. Kerr's address was his next stop, but the shadow of Sir Edmund Blake loomed larger, and Poirot wondered if the opposition leader's hand was guiding these events. The stakes were rising and time was short. Join us next time as Poirot ventures into East London, where the trail of Thomas Kerr promises to reveal a darker side of this political conspiracy. Chapter 6. The East London Trail. Hercule Poirot stepped out of 10 Downing Street into a crisp London afternoon, the last traces of morning fog giving way to a pale sun that did little to warm the chill of intrigue surrounding him. The clues from Mrs. Fielding's office burned in his mind. Thomas Kerr, the mysterious maintenance worker who had appeared briefly, lingered near the Prime Minister's study and then vanished like a phantom. His listed address in East London, provided by a shady employment agency, was Poirot's next lead in unravelling the theft of the memo that threatened to topple the government. With his coat buttoned against the autumn breeze and his cane tapping a determined rhythm, Poirot hailed a taxi, directing the driver to a gritty corner of Whitechapel. The journey took him from the polished heart of power to the city's rough edges, where secrets hid in the shadows of soot-stained tenements. As the taxi rattled along, Poirot's little grey cells churned, piecing together the puzzle. Was Kerr a lone opportunist, a hired thief, or a pawn in a grander scheme orchestrated by Sir Edmund Blake or another unseen player. The taxi stopped at a narrow street lined with crumbling brick buildings, their windows grimy and curtains drawn. The address, a dilapidated boarding house, loomed before him, its faded sign creaking in the wind. Poirot paid the driver and approached the door, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. A group of dock workers lingered nearby, their conversation halting as they noticed the impeccably dressed detective. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of damp wood and cheap tobacco. The landlady, a wiry woman named Mrs. Doyle with a pinched face and suspicious eyes, met him in the dimly lit foyer. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume," she said, her tone wary, as if she'd been expecting trouble. Poirot offered a disarming smile. "Madame, I seek a man named Thomas Kerr, a tenant of yours, I believe. A matter of some urgency." Mrs. Doyle led him to a creaking staircase, explaining that Kerr had rented a room for a week but hadn't been seen in days. His belongings, she said, were still upstairs untouched. Poirot followed her to a small, sparsely furnished room on the third floor, its single window overlooking a cluttered alley. The bed was unmade, a toolbox sat in the corner, and a few papers were scattered on a rickety table. Poirot's gloved hands moved with precision as he examined the scene. The toolbox contained standard tools, wrenches, pliers, but also a small crowbar, unusual for plumbing work. The papers were more revealing. A scribbled note with the words, "Downing, 10 p.m., service door," and a torn photograph showing a man in a dark coat, his face partially obscured, standing with another figure who resembled Clara Wentworth. Poirot's pulse quickened. Was this the man Mrs. Fielding had seen Clara meeting in secret? Questioning Mrs. Doyle further, Poirot learned that Kerr had kept odd hours, often leaving late at night and returning before dawn. She recalled him receiving a visitor 2 nights before his disappearance. A tall man in a tailored suit carrying a briefcase who spoke in hushed tones. He didn't give his name, but Mrs. Doyle overheard him mention Blake and the papers. Poirot's suspicions about Sir Edmund Blake deepened. Could this visitor have been one of Blake's operatives, delivering instructions to Kerr? Or was Kerr himself working for a foreign power, using Blake as a cover? Poirot pressed Mrs. Doyle for more details, but she grew evasive, muttering about not wanting trouble. He slipped her a few shillings, and she admitted Kerr had left behind a locked tin box under the floorboards, which she'd been too nervous to open. With Mrs. Doyle's reluctant permission, Poirot pried up the loose floorboard, revealing a small rusted tin. Inside were a forged identification card for Thomas Kerr, a train ticket to Dover dated the day after the memo's theft, and a cryptic note in code. "EB confirms drop. Midnight, Lion's Head." Poirot's mind raced. The Lion's Head was a dockside pub, a known haunt for smugglers and informants. The ticket suggested Kerr had planned to flee, perhaps with the memo in hand. The code pointed to a rendezvous, possibly with Blake or his agent. Poirot pocketed the items, thanking Mrs. Doyle, who seemed eager for him to leave. As he stepped back into the street, he noticed a man in a dark coat watching from across the road, his face half hidden by a scarf. When Poirot turned to approach, the man slipped into an alley, vanishing as quickly as Kerr himself. The trail was growing hotter, but also more dangerous. Poirot knew he needed to visit the Lion's Head pub to uncover the meaning of the coded note. But first, he had to verify Kerr's connection to Blake and clarify Clara's role in the mysterious photograph. The boarding house had confirmed Kerr's involvement, but whether he was thief, courier, or scapegoat remained unclear. As Poirot hailed another taxi, the weight of the nation's stability pressed heavier on his shoulders. The memo was out there, in hands that could ignite a scandal, or worse. With every step, the stakes climbed higher, and Poirot's resolve hardened. The truth was close, but it danced in the shadows of London's underbelly. Join us next time as Poirot ventures to the Lion's Head, where a midnight meeting may hold the key to the conspiracy. Chapter 7. The Lion's Head. Rendezvous Hercule Poirot's taxi rumbled through the darkened streets of London's docklands, the glow of gaslights casting flickering shadows on the cobblestones. The clues from Thomas Kerr's boarding house, a forged ID, a train ticket to Dover, and a coded note about a midnight meeting at the Lion's Head pub, had set his little grey cells ablaze. The air grew thick with the briny scent of the Thames as he neared the riverfront, where the Lion's Head stood, a weathered tavern known for its rough clientele and whispered deals. Poirot's mind churned with questions. Was Kerr the thief, delivering the stolen memo to a contact at this seedy rendezvous? Did the note's mention of E.B. confirm Sir Edmund Blake's involvement, or was it a deliberate misdirection? As the taxi halted outside the pub's sagging facade, Poirot adjusted his hat, his calm exterior masking the thrill of the chase. Tonight, he would step into the lion's den to uncover the next piece of the puzzle threatening the nation's stability. The Lion's Head was a cacophony of clinking glasses, raucous laughter, and the low hum of secretive conversations. Smoke curled in the dim light, and weathered faces turned to eye the impeccably dressed detective as he entered. Poirot's presence was as out of place as a swan in a swamp, but his confident stride drew little attention from the patrons, who were too engrossed in their pints or schemes. He found a shadowed corner table, ordering a modest glass of brandy to blend in, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of Kerr or the man in the dark coat he'd glimpsed in Whitechapel. The clock above the bar read 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes until the midnight meeting hinted at in Kerr's note. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on his cane, his senses attuned to every detail. The barman's nervous glance, a sailor's hushed argument, a cloaked figure slipping through a back door. To gather information, Poirot approached the barman, a burly man with a scarred cheek and wary eyes. "Monsieur," he said softly, his accent deliberate to charm. "You see many faces here, no? I seek a man named Thomas Kerr, or perhaps another who speaks of papers and meetings." The barman shrugged, claiming ignorance, but his grip tightened on a rag when Poirot mentioned E.B. Sliding a coin across the counter, Poirot pressed further. The barman leaned in, muttering that a man matching Kerr's description, thin, cap low, had been seen the previous night with a well-dressed stranger in a private booth. They'd spoken of a delivery and Dover, then left through the back. Poirot's pulse quickened. The train ticket to Dover was no coincidence. He asked about the stranger's appearance, but the barman only recalled a gold watch chain glinting under the lamplight, a detail Poirot filed away. As midnight approached, Poirot positioned himself near the back door, where a narrow alley led to the docks. The door creaked open, and a man in a dark coat entered, his face obscured by a scarf, eerily similar to the figure from Whitechapel. He scanned the room, then moved to a booth where a second man waited, his back to Poirot. The detective edged closer, straining to overhear their conversation over the pub's din. Snatches of words reached him. Memo, Blake, safe passage. The man in the dark coat slid a small package across the table, which the other quickly pocketed. Poirot's heart raced. Was this the stolen memo? Before he could act, the second man stood, revealing a glimpse of a gold watch chain. He hurried out the back door, while the man in the dark coat lingered, lighting a cigarette. Poirot followed the man with the watch chain into the alley, keeping to the shadows. The figure moved swiftly toward the docks, where a small boat bobbed under a flickering lamp. Poirot's cane made no sound as he trailed, but a loose cobblestone betrayed him, clattering loudly. The man spun around, his face briefly illuminated, a sharp jaw, cold eyes, and a scar above his brow. He bolted, disappearing into the maze of crates and barrels. Poirot cursed softly, his pursuit thwarted, but he'd seen enough to know this was no ordinary courier. Returning to the pub, he found the man in the dark coat gone, the booth empty, save for a crumpled cigarette pack. Inside it, Poirot found a slip of paper with a Dover address and the initials E.B. scrawled in haste. The night had yielded vital clues. a rendezvous, a possible handoff, and a link to Dover, where Kerr's trail led. But the man with the watch chain, likely Blake's operative, had slipped away, and the memo's whereabouts remained uncertain. Poirot's mind buzzed with connections: Clara's secret meeting, Lady Margaret's evasions, and now this dockside exchange. As he left the Lion's Head, the Thames lapped ominously against the docks, whispering of deeper conspiracies. Poirot knew his next move was to follow the Dover lead, where Kerr or his contact might be waiting. The truth was tantalizingly close, yet danger lurked in every shadow. Join us next time as Poirot journeys to Dover, where the trail of the memo promises to unravel a web of betrayal. Chapter 8: The Dover Connection. Hercule Poirot stood on the platform of Victoria Station, the morning sun cutting through a thin veil of mist as he prepared to board the train to Dover. The clues from the Lion's Head pub, the crumpled note with a Dover address, the initials EB, and the fleeting glimpse of the man with the gold watch chain had set his mind ablaze with possibilities. The stolen memo, with its damning revelations of wartime funds misuse, was likely en route to this coastal town, perhaps in the hands of the elusive Thomas Kerr, or the scarred man who had vanished into the dockside shadows. Poirot's gloved hands clutched his cane as he boarded the train, his sharp eyes scanning the crowded platform for any sign of pursuit. The rhythm of the carriage wheels soon lulled him into deep thought, his little grey cells piecing together the puzzle. Was Sir Edmund Blake, the opposition leader, orchestrating this scandal to topple the Prime Minister? Or was a foreign power pulling the strings, using Kerr as a courier? As the train sped toward the cliffs of Dover, Poirot knew this journey would bring him closer to the heart of the conspiracy, threatening Britain's stability. The train journey was a study in contrasts, the green fields of Kent giving way to the rugged coastline, where the sea churned under a slate-grey sky. Poirot's compartment was quiet, save for the rustle of a newspaper held by a fellow passenger, a man with a neatly trimmed beard and a nervous habit of checking his pocket watch. Poirot's instincts prickled. The man's watch chain glinted with a familiar gold sheen, reminiscent of the figure at the Lion's Head. Keeping his expression neutral, Poirot struck up a casual conversation, complimenting the man's timepiece. The stranger, introducing himself as Mr. Charles Vane, claimed to be a Dover merchant returning home, but his answers were clipped, his eyes darting to the window when Poirot mentioned London's political circles. Sensing discretion was needed, Poirot filed away Vane's name and mannerisms, suspecting he might be more than a mere merchant. Arriving in Dover, Poirot stepped onto the bustling platform, the salty air sharp in his lungs. The address from the Lion's Head note led to a narrow street near the docks, where a nondescript lodging house stood, its paint peeling from years of sea spray. The landlady, a weathered woman named Mrs. Hargreaves, greeted him with suspicion, her arms crossed as she eyed his impeccable suit. "Monsieur, I seek a man named Thomas Kerr, or perhaps another who arrived recently with papers of importance," Poirot said, his voice smooth but firm. Mrs. Hargreaves hesitated, then admitted a man matching Kerr's description had rented a room 2 days ago, paying in cash and keeping to himself. He'd left that morning, she said, but had received a visitor the previous night, a tall man with a scar above his brow, carrying a briefcase. Poirot's pulse quickened. The scarred man from the pub was here, confirming the trail. Mrs. Hargreaves led him to Kerr's room, a damp, sparsely furnished space with a view of the choppy channel. Poirot's meticulous search revealed little at first: a worn coat, a half-empty packet of cigarettes, and a map of Dover's coastline marked with a red circle around a secluded cove. But under the mattress, he found a hidden envelope containing a single sheet, a partial copy of the stolen memo, detailing a transaction of $50,000 to an unnamed foreign account. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the initials EB were scrawled in the margin, alongside a date matching the night of the theft. Poirot's mind raced. Was this a draft, a decoy, or proof of Blake's involvement? The cove marked on the map suggested a handover point, perhaps for smuggling the memo out of England. To gather more, Poirot questioned Mrs. Hargreaves about the scarred man. She described him as brusque, with a clipped accent, possibly German, and a habit of glancing at the harbour. He'd arrived late, she said, and left after a heated discussion with Kerr, their voices carrying through the thin walls. Words like delivery and midnight had reached her ears, echoing the coded note from Whitechapel. Poirot pressed further, learning that Kerr had been seen near the cove the previous evening, carrying a small package. The landlady also mentioned a local fisherman, old Tom, who'd ferried a passenger to a boat offshore that same night. Poirot thanked her, slipping her a coin, and made his way to the docks, where fishing boats bobbed alongside rusted trawlers. At the harbour, Poirot found old Tom, a grizzled man with hands like leather, mending nets under a sagging awning. The detective's charm worked its magic, and after a brief exchange, Tom admitted to rowing a man, thin, cap-low, likely Kerr, to a small yacht anchored beyond the cove 2 nights prior. The yacht had no name, but its crew spoke in a foreign tongue, and a man with a gold watch chain had been waiting on deck. Poirot's heart sank. The memo might already be out of England, bound for hostile hands, but Tom's final detail offered hope. Kerr had returned alone, looking shaken, and was last seen heading toward a local inn, the Anchor's Rest. Poirot's resolve hardened. Kerr was still in Dover, and with him, perhaps, the original memo. As dusk fell, Poirot stood on the windswept docks, the distant cliffs looming like sentinels. The trail had led him from London's power corridors to this rugged outpost, each clue tightening the noose around the conspiracy. Charles Vane's gold watch chain, the scarred man's foreign accent, and Kerr's flight to the cove pointed to a plot far larger than a political scandal. Was Blake selling secrets to a foreign power, or was Kerr a rogue agent double-crossing his handler? Poirot's next move was clear. Find Kerr at the Anchor's Rest before he slipped away again. The sea roared in the distance, a reminder of the stakes. Britain's honour hung in the balance. Join us next time as Poirot confronts Kerr at the inn, where a tense encounter may finally reveal the memo's fate. Chapter 9. Confrontation at the Anchor's Rest. The wind howled across Dover's rugged coastline as Hercule Poirot made his way through the cobbled streets, the salty tang of the sea mingling with the faint aroma of his lavender-scented handkerchief, which he pressed briefly to his nose. The clues unearthed at the lodging house, the partial memo copy, the map marked with a secluded cove, and old Tom's account of Thomas Kerr's boat trip had brought him tantalizingly close to the heart of the conspiracy. Kerr, the elusive maintenance worker, was still in Dover, last seen heading to the Anchor's Rest, a weathered inn nestled among the town's narrow alleys. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with anticipation, piecing together the threads. The stolen memo, Sir Edmund Blake's initials, the scarred man with a foreign accent, and the mysterious yacht that might have spirited secrets across the Channel. As dusk painted the sky in hues of bruised purple, Poirot's cane tapped a determined rhythm toward the inn. His mind braced for a confrontation that could unmask the thief, or expose a deeper betrayal. The Anchor's Rest was a squat, timber-framed building, its windows glowing with the warm flicker of oil lamps. The sign above the door creaked in the wind, depicting a rusted anchor entwined with seaweed. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of ale, tobacco, and the faint mustiness of old wood. A handful of patrons, fishermen, dock workers, and a few shifty-eyed travellers huddled over their drinks, their conversations a low murmur punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. Poirot's impeccable suit and polished demeanour drew curious glances, but he moved with purpose, his eyes scanning for Kerr's described features. Thin build, low cap, nervous demeanour. The innkeeper, a broad-shouldered man with a bushy beard named Mr. Caldwell, stood behind the bar, polishing glasses with a rag that had seen better days. Poirot approached, his voice low and charming. "Monsieur Caldwell, I seek a guest of yours, a man named Thomas Kerr. A matter of some importance, you understand." Caldwell's eyes narrowed, but a discreet coin from Poirot's gloved hand loosened his tongue. He confirmed Kerr had taken a room upstairs, arriving 2 nights ago and rarely leaving except for brief outings to the docks. "He's a quiet one, keeps his door locked," Caldwell muttered, gesturing toward a narrow staircase. Poirot thanked him and ascended, his steps silent despite the creaking boards. At room number 7 he paused, listening for movement. A faint rustle, like papers being shuffled, reached his ears. He knocked sharply, his voice firm but polite. "Monsieur Kerr, it is Hercule Poirot. I must speak with you about a certain document of national consequence. Open the door, s'il vous plaît." The rustling stopped, replaced by a tense silence. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a gaunt man with hollow cheeks and a cap pulled low over wary eyes. Thomas Kerr, unmistakably. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped back, allowing Poirot to enter. The room was sparse. A sagging bed, a chipped washstand, and a small table cluttered with a half-eaten meal and a crumpled newspaper. Poirot's gaze fell on a leather satchel in the corner, its strap worn but suspiciously bulging. "Monsieur Kerr," he began, seating himself with deliberate calm. "You have been most difficult to find. A memo stolen from Downing Street has led me to you. I advise you to speak plainly. The truth will serve you better than silence." Kerr's eyes darted to the satchel, betraying his nerves. He claimed to be a simple worker, hired for a one-off job at Downing Street, with no knowledge of any memo. But Poirot's piercing stare and relentless questions chipped away at his facade. "You were seen near the study, monsieur, on the night the memo vanished. You met a man with a scar at the Lion's Head, and you rode to a yacht under cover of darkness. Shall I continue?" Kerr's composure cracked, his voice rising. "I didn't steal it! I was paid to deliver a package, that's all." Poirot leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Paid by whom? Sir Edmund Blake, perhaps, or the man with the gold watch chain?" Kerr's face paled, and he sank onto the bed, his hands gripping his cap. Under Poirot's unyielding pressure, Kerr confessed fragments of the truth. He'd been approached by a man named Vogel, likely the scarred stranger, weeks ago, offering a hefty sum to retrieve a document from Downing Street's safe. Vogel provided the safe's combination, claiming it was a test of loyalty for a higher cause. Kerr, desperate for money, had complied, slipping into the study via the service door and taking the memo, but he grew uneasy when Vogel demanded a midnight handoff at the Lion's Head. Fearing betrayal, Kerr had kept the memo, hiding in Dover while deciding his next move. He swore he hadn't read it, but knew it was valuable enough to ruin lives. "Where is it now?" Poirot demanded, his eyes fixed on the satchel. Kerr hesitated, then pulled out a sealed envelope, its edges worn but intact. "The memo," he whispered, handing it over with shaking hands. Poirot's heart raced as he examined the envelope, confirming the Prime Minister's seal. But his triumph was short-lived. A sudden thud at the door interrupted them. Before Poirot could react, the door burst open, revealing the scarred man, Vogel, his face twisted with fury and a pistol gleaming in his hand. "You've meddled too far, detective," he snarled, his accent unmistakably German. Poirot raised his cane, his voice steady. "Monsieur, you mistake me for one who is easily intimidated. Drop the weapon, and we may yet resolve this without violence." Vogel hesitated, his eyes flicking to Kerr, who cowered against the wall. In that moment of distraction, Poirot lunged, knocking the pistol aside with his cane. A scuffle ensued, but Caldwell, alerted by the noise, stormed in with 2 burly patrons, subduing Vogel. With the memo secured and Vogel restrained, Poirot's mind turned to the final pieces: Vogel's employer, the role of EB, and whether Blake or a foreign power was the mastermind. Kerr, now cooperative, promised to testify, But Poirot knew the scarred man held more answers. As the inn's patrons dragged Vogel to the local constable, Poirot clutched the envelope, its weight a reminder of the crisis averted and the questions still unanswered. The Dover night closed in, the sea's roar echoing the storm yet to come. Join us next time as Poirot interrogates Vogel, unraveling the true mastermind behind the conspiracy. Chapter 10. The Unveiling of the Truth. Hercule Poirot sat in the dimly lit parlour of the Anchor's Rest, the recovered memo resting safely in his coat pocket, its seal unbroken but its secrets heavy with consequence. The scuffle with Vogel, the scarred German operative, had left the inn buzzing with nervous energy, but Poirot's mind was a calm vortex of deduction. The Dover night pressed against the windows, the distant crash of waves a stark reminder of how close the stolen document had come to leaving England's shores. Vogel was now in custody at the local police station, and Thomas Kerr, the frightened courier, had agreed to cooperate. But Poirot knew the true mastermind behind the memo's theft remained shrouded. Was it Sir Edmund Blake, the opposition leader whose initials EB haunted every clue? Or was a foreign power pulling the strings, using Blake as a pawn? With Captain Hastings arriving from London to assist, Poirot prepared for a final interrogation to unmask the conspiracy's architect and restore order to the nation's fragile trust. As he sipped a glass of brandy, his little grey cells worked tirelessly, ready to weave the final threads of this intricate tapestry. Hastings burst into the parlour, his face flushed from the journey. "Poirot, old chap, you've got the memo. But what's this about a German thug?" Poirot raised a hand, his voice steady. "Patience, mon ami. The memo is safe, but the truth is not yet fully revealed. We must speak with Vogel, and quickly." The two men, accompanied by a stern-faced constable, made their way to the Dover police station, a squat brick building smelling of damp stone and ink. Vogel sat in a bare cell, his scar stark under the harsh light, his defiance tempered by the reality of his capture. Poirot stood before him, his small frame radiating authority. "Monsieur Vogel, you are at a crossroads. Speak the truth about the memo, and you may yet find leniency. Who hired you? What was the plan?" Vogel's eyes narrowed, but Poirot's unyielding gaze broke his resolve. After a tense silence, he began to talk. He was an agent for a German faction seeking leverage over Britain, hired to secure the memo as proof of the Prime Minister's wartime misdeeds. The document, he revealed, was meant to be smuggled to Berlin, where it would be used to blackmail the government into favourable trade concessions. But Vogel's employer wasn't Sir Edmund Blake. It was Clara Wentworth, the ambitious aide. Poirot's moustache twitched as the pieces fell into place. "Clara," Hastings gasped, but Poirot silenced him, pressing Vogel for details. Clara had contacted Vogel through an intermediary, providing the safe's combination and Kerr's hiring details. She'd orchestrated the theft, promising Vogel a cut of the profits from her true client, a shadowy consortium of foreign investors tied to Blake's political allies. Poirot's mind flashed back to Clara's guarded demeanour, her bitterness at being overlooked, and her secret meeting with the man in the dark coat. She had played a double game, using Kerr as a disposable courier and Vogel as muscle, all while deflecting suspicion onto Grayson and Lady Margaret. But why the initials EB? Vogel smirked, explaining that Clara had planted Blake's initials on the memo's copy to frame him, ensuring her own tracks were covered if the plan unravelled. She'd counted on Blake's rivalry with the Prime Minister to make him a plausible scapegoat. Poirot nodded, impressed by her cunning but resolute in her downfall. "And where is Mademoiselle Wentworth now?" he demanded. Vogel shrugged, claiming she'd planned to leave for Paris once the memo was delivered. With Vogel's confession secured, Poirot and Hastings returned to London by the first train, the memo still in Poirot's possession. At 10 Downing Street, Poirot requested an urgent meeting with the Prime Minister, Lady Margaret, Harold Grayson, and Clara Wentworth. who had been summoned under the pretense of a routine briefing. The study was tense, the fire crackling as the group assembled. Clara's face was a mask of composure, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear as Poirot began. Mesdames et messieurs, the game is over. The memo is safe and the truth is laid bare. He recounted the trail, Kerr's theft, Vogel's role, and Clara's masterful deception. The Prime Minister's face paled. Lady Margaret gasped, and Grayson looked stunned, but Clara's lips tightened into a thin line. Poirot turned to Clara, his voice like a blade. Mademoiselle, you sought power and wealth, betraying your country for foreign gold. You used Kerr, framed Blake, and manipulated all in this room. But the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot are not so easily deceived. Clara tried to protest, claiming she was merely a loyal aide, but Poirot produced the partial memo copy with EB in her handwriting, confirmed by a sample from her desk. Faced with Vogel's testimony and the evidence, she crumpled, admitting her role. She'd been promised a fortune by the consortium, enough to escape her subordinate life and wield influence abroad. Her ambition had blinded her to the consequences, she whispered, tears in her eyes. The Prime Minister, shaken but relieved, ordered Clara's arrest, and she was led away by constables. Poirot handed him the sealed memo, advising its destruction to prevent further leaks. Lady Margaret, cleared of suspicion, thanked Poirot with quiet dignity, while Grayson, rattled but loyal, vowed to tighten security. As for Sir Edmund Blake, Poirot learned he was unaware of Clara's scheme, his initials used as a convenient red herring. The foreign consortium, exposed by Vogel's confession, would face diplomatic repercussions, but that was for others to handle. Poirot's work was done. As he and Hastings left Downing Street, the London sky was clear. The fog of deceit lifted at last. The nation's stability was preserved, and the Prime Minister's secret would remain buried. Poirot allowed himself a small smile, satisfied with the triumph of his little grey cells. Mon ami, he said to Hastings, the truth is a stubborn thing. It always finds its way. Back at his flat, he poured a tisane, reflecting on the case's twists and the human frailties it revealed. To you, dear viewers, what a journey this has been. If you've enjoyed this tale of intrigue, hit that subscribe button and join us for more mysteries. Your support means the world, and we'll see you in the next adventure, where Poirot's genius will unravel another enigma. Stay curious and au revoir.